In a 2005 episode, a man named Randy is sent to a meeting for people who drink too much, and he is told something that sounds like pure kindness. His drinking is a disease, they say, and he is powerless to control it. He believes them. Then he gets worse. He ends up in a wheelchair, drinking more than ever. The bottle never changed. His belief did. That small, sad scene holds something South Park has been doing quietly for almost 30 years, buried under all the shock and the noise. The show keeps making one steady argument about how people handle pain. Comfort is not the same as help. A label is not the same as a cure. Being protected from every hard truth makes a person weaker, never stronger. This is 10 episodes across 30 years. One idea traced from a drunk dad in 2005 to a doctor prescribing body positivity in 2024. Welcome to East Park. Let's begin. How Randy Marsh talked himself into being sick. There is a way of thinking that has slowly become the normal way most people talk about their problems. It says that when a person is struggling, the first and most important step is to find the right name for what is wrong with them. Give the feeling a label. Bring in an expert. Treat the struggle as a kind of sickness, something that happened to the person rather than something the person is doing. And above all, be gentle, because the worst thing anyone can do is make someone feel bad about feeling bad. This way of thinking shows up everywhere now. It shows up in schools, in workplaces, in the way friends comfort each other, and in the way television tells stories about pain. For most of the last 25 years, one cartoon has been quietly poking holes in the whole idea, episode after episode, long before most people had a name for it. South Park has a reputation for being loud, rude, and built mostly to shock. That reputation is half true and half a trap, because it hides how careful the show actually is about one specific thing. Over and over, across seasons that span a quarter of a century, the show keeps telling a version of the same story. A character has a normal struggle. Someone hands them a label and tells them they are not really in control of it. The character grabs that label with both hands. And then, instead of getting better, the character gets worse. The first time the show told this story cleanly, with no jokes hiding the point, was a long way back, and the man at the center of it was the same bumbling dad who would later become the heart of the whole town. By the time season 9 aired in 2005, South Park had figured out what kind of show it wanted to be. The early years leaned hard on gross-out humor and shock for its own sake. The middle years, the ones that started around this point, are where the show got sharp. The writing got faster, the targets got bigger, and the jokes started carrying real arguments underneath them. Randy Marsh had also settled into his role by now. He is Stan's father, and he is the town's purest example of a grown man who believes whatever he is told and throws his whole body into it. Randy also has one specific habit that matters here. He is the kind of person who is always sure something is medically wrong with him. The type who reads about a sickness and immediately decides he has it. His own son knows this about him. That detail is the key that unlocks the entire episode. The episode is called Bloody Mary, and it first aired on December 7th, 2005. It opens with the boys in a karate class where the instructor scolds Cartman for having no self-control and tells the class that real discipline is something that comes from inside a person, not something handed to them. That single line sits at the front of the episode like a thesis nobody notices yet. Right after that lesson about control coming from within, the show goes and tells a story about a man who decides he has no control at all. What happens on the surface is simple to follow. Randy has been drinking and he drives the boys home anyway. A police officer pulls him over and Randy is arrested for driving drunk. His license is taken away. A court orders him to do community service and to attend meetings for people who drink too much. At those meetings, Randy is taught a set of ideas that he has never heard laid out so plainly before. He is told that his drinking is a disease. He is told that he is powerless over it, that he cannot control it on his own, and that the only way to get better is to hand himself over to a greater power above him. The meetings have the feel of a church service, with the same kind of certainty and the same demand for belief. Randy is doubtful at first. He does not stay doubtful for long. Once Randy accepts the idea that he has a disease and that he is powerless, the show makes a move that most stories would never dare. Randy gets worse. He does not cut back. He drinks more than before, because in his mind, the drinking is no longer a choice he is making, so there is nothing he can do but ride it out. He ends up in a wheelchair. He shaves his head the way a person might if they were dying of something serious. The label has not helped him manage anything. The label has given him permission to stop trying, and the moment trying stopped, the bottom fell out. The way the show builds these scenes is what makes the point land instead of just sitting there. The meeting room is drawn and paced to feel like a place of worship rather than a place of help, which tells the audience exactly how the writers see it without a single character having to explain it. The drinking does not get treated as a wild cartoon gag either. Each step downward for Randy is shown plainly and a little sadly. The wheelchair, the shaved head, the certainty in his voice that he is doomed. The worse his belief gets, the worse his body gets, and the show keeps these two things moving together on purpose, so that the belief and the decline feel like the same thing. Nothing about it is an accident. Underneath all of this is the argument the whole episode is built to make. Telling a person they are powerless can turn into a kind of prophecy that makes itself come true. The name itself becomes the cage. A man who believes he can choose to drink less will sometimes choose to drink less. A man who has been taught that choice is not even on the table has no reason to reach for it. South Park is not saying that drinking too much is no big deal, and it is not saying the people running those meetings are evil. The show is saying something narrower and harder to argue with. The story a person believes about their own problem changes how big that problem gets. Hand someone a story where they are helpless, and helplessness is often what shows up. Stan is the one who sees through it, and he sees through it for a reason the writers planted early. Stan knows his father always thinks he is sick when he is not. So when Randy starts insisting he has a deadly disease, Stan is not impressed and not scared. Stan keeps telling his dad a plain truth, which is that he does not need a miracle and he does not need to surrender to anything. He just needs to drink less. It is the least dramatic advice in the whole episode, and the show clearly believes it is also the only advice that is actually true. The back half of the story turns into a chase after an easy fix, which is the other half of the same sickness. A statue of the Virgin Mary in a nearby town starts bleeding from its rear end, and a leader of the church arrives and declares it a miracle. Crowds of sick and desperate people line up, hoping the statue can cure their real illnesses. Things like cancer. Randy, now fully convinced he has a disease worse than all of theirs, demands to be taken to the statue, and even tries to cut the line ahead of people who are genuinely dying. The statue sprays blood on him. Randy decides on the spot that he is cured, climbs out of his wheelchair, and swears he will never drink again. He has gone looking for someone or something outside himself to fix him. First the meetings, then a magic statue, anything except his own choices. The ending takes both crutches away at once. The head of the church examines the statue and decides it is not a miracle after all, just a normal bodily thing happening to a stone figure, which deflates the whole circus. With the magic gone, Stan finally gets his father to hear the real point. There was never a disease that held Randy prisoner, and there was never a miracle that set him free. There was only Randy, who could drink less if he simply decided to. Randy accepts this, and the episode closes with him carrying his son home on his back as the sun goes down. The fix turned out to be the boring thing his son had been saying the entire time. The reason Randy reaches for the label so fast is worth sitting with, because it is the same reason real people reach for it. A label takes the weight off. If the drinking is a disease, then Randy is not a man who keeps making a bad choice. He is a victim of something that landed on him. That feels better in the moment. It removes the shame. It hands him an identity that asks nothing of him except that he keep believing in it. For a person who already loves to believe he is sick, this is the most comfortable bed in the world, and he climbs right in. The trouble is that comfort and getting better are not the same thing, and the episode pulls them apart on purpose so the gap is impossible to miss. What the show is poking at here is not some small idea on the edge of society. The notion that heavy drinking is a disease and that the person caught in it is powerless was, and still is, the most common way the whole country talks about the subject. The meetings Randy attends are based on a real and widely respected approach, one that millions of people lean on. South Park walked straight up to one of the most accepted ideas in the culture and asked an uncomfortable question about it. The question was not whether the idea helps some people. The question was what the idea does to a person who treats powerlessness as the whole truth and uses it as a reason to give up. For a show that aired right after a cartoon about Karate Kids, that is a surprisingly serious thing to chew on. There is also a lesson buried in here for anyone who grew up watching, even if they never noticed they were learning it. The show keeps suggesting that a name for a struggle can quietly become a wall around it. Call yourself broken and you may stop trying to stand. The healthier path, in the show's eyes, almost always runs back toward the same plain place. Take responsibility. Make the small, dull choice. Trust that control comes from the inside, exactly like the karate teacher said in the very first minutes. The episode never preaches this with a speech. It just lets Randy fall apart while believing he is helpless, then lets him stand up the moment he believes he is not. This early story is the seed of everything the rest of the show would later grow. The shape of it never really changes. A struggle appears, a label gets offered, the label promises comfort and removes blame, the character sinks instead of rising, and the way out turns out to be the ordinary, unglamorous act of taking charge again. South Park found this pattern in 2000 2005 with a drunk dad and a bleeding statue, and the show liked the pattern so much that it would spend the next 20 years pointing the same camera at bigger and bigger targets. Randy was only the first patient. The show was just warming up. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Randy Marsh was a grown man who chose his own cage, and a person can at least argue that an adult should know better. The harder version of this story is the one where the patient is a child, where the struggle is not a bad habit, but a feeling, and where the person handing out the label is wearing a doctor's coat and using words a kid has no way to fight back against. The next time South Park ran this idea, it would do it to a 10-year-old, and it would not give him a happy piggyback ride home. Section 2. The boy the doctor could not help. The harder version of the story is the one where the patient is a child. An adult who picks up a label for his own bad habit can at least be told he should know better. A kid has no such defense. When a child is hurting and a grown-up in a doctor's coat steps forward to name the problem, the child has no way to argue, no reason to doubt, and nowhere to put the feeling except into the box the adult hands him. South Park found this version of the story 6 years after Randy fell apart over a bottle, and the show told it with almost none of the usual jokes to soften the blow. The boy at the center of it was Stan Marsh, and the thing that had gone wrong with him was not a behavior anyone could see, it was a feeling. By 2011, in the middle of its 15th season, the show had earned the confidence to be sad on purpose. The early shock humor was long behind it, and the writing had reached a point where an episode could spend most of its time on something quiet and aching, and trust the audience to stay. Stan had also become a specific kind of character by now. Among the 4 main boys, he is the steady one, the normal one, the kid who usually ends each story by figuring out the lesson and saying it plainly. He is the closest thing the show has to a regular person. So when the show decided to break someone, breaking Stan meant breaking the one character the audience trusted to be okay. The episode is called You're Getting Old, and it first aired on June 8th, 2011, as the last episode before a long break, which gave its ending even more weight. The trouble starts at Stan's 10th birthday party. One of his gifts is a CD from a band playing a trendy new style of music made for kids his age. When the music plays, it sounds to Stan like pure garbage, a mess of farts and drum beats with nothing good in it. That alone might be a normal complaint about bad music. The problem is that the feeling does not stop at the CD. Soon, everything around Stan begins to look, sound, and smell like literal waste. Movies turn to filth in front of him. Ice cream, a thing every kid is supposed to love without thinking, becomes disgusting. The whole world goes brown and foul, and Stan is the only one who can see it that way. He becomes frightened, because a person who suddenly finds that nothing in life is good anymore has every reason to think something is deeply wrong with him. So Stan does the sensible thing and goes to a doctor. The first answer he gets is gentle and reasonable. The doctor tells him that tastes naturally change as a person grows up, that the things a little kid loves do not always survive into older years, and that there may be nothing wrong at all. That is a kind and honest thing to say, and it might even be true. But the show does not let the visit end there. The doctor runs tests, and during the tests, everything Stan looks at keeps turning to filth in front of him. Faced with a boy who finds the entire world repulsive, the doctor reaches for a tidy answer, the way doctors in this kind of story always seem to. He gives the feeling a name. He tells Stan that he has become a cynical jerk. The word cynical means a person who has started seeing everything as fake, cheap, or pointless. Someone who has lost the ability to be charmed by anything. That is the official finding. That is what the visit produces. A heavy, frightening change in a child gets boiled down to a short, sour-sounding label, and the label does absolutely nothing to help him. The way the show builds this is what makes it cut so deep. Rather than have a narrator explain what Stan is going through, the show simply puts the audience inside his eyes. The world really does appear as filth on screen, so the sadness is shown instead of described. The cruelest version of this comes during a fight at the movies. Stan and Kyle, who have been best friends for the entire run of the series, get into an argument. As Kyle stands there speaking, his whole body slowly changes into a giant talking pile of waste right in front of Stan, while Stan watches in horror. The animation is doing the heavy work. It is telling the audience that Stan can no longer even look at the person closest to him without seeing something rotten. Stan does not scream or cry. After the shock passes, he goes calm, turns, and walks away. And a friendship that has lasted hundreds of episodes ends without a fight scene or a big speech. It just quietly stops. The friends pull away from Stan one by one, and the show is honest about why. Stan has become a person who drains the fun out of every room. Kyle, Kenny, and Cartman stop wanting to be around him because spending time with someone who finds everything pointless is exhausting, and they are 10 years old and want to enjoy themselves. The loneliness piles on top of the sadness. Stan is not only seeing the world as garbage, he is also slowly being left alone with that view, which is exactly how this kind of heavy sadness works in real life. The feeling pushes people away, and the distance makes the feeling worse, and around it goes. Stan's father runs his own version of the same crisis in the background, which ties this episode straight back to the one about the bleeding statue. Randy, unhappy in a way he will not admit, throws himself into the same trendy new music his son hates, trying to become a young musician and feel alive again. He acts more and more like an overgrown child, and his wife Sharon finally demands to know what is wrong with him. Randy breaks down and confesses something the show rarely lets a grown-up say out loud. He admits that he has been unhappy the whole time, for a long time, underneath all the silliness. The same man who once grabbed a disease label to explain away his drinking is now a man with a real, plain unhappiness that no label can touch. Two members of the same family are drowning in the same gray feeling, one too young to name it and one too proud to. How the show ends, this is the part people still talk about, as a famous and genuinely sad Fleetwood Mac song called Landslide plays over the final minutes. A song that happens to be about getting older and watching life change. The bottom falls out of the family. Sharon and Randy separate. They sell the house. Stan moves into a new home with his mother and his sister. His family split in half. His old friends Kyle and Cartman are shown bonding over a video game, sharing a smile, slipping into the easy closeness that Kyle and Stan used to have, which means Stan has even lost his place in the group. And Stan, sitting in his new room, still sees the world as filth. There is no scene where he gets better. There is no doctor with a second answer. The show, which had spent 15 seasons putting everything back to normal at the end of every story so the next one could start fresh, simply refused to fix anything this time. The ending arrives suddenly, the music fades, and the boy is left exactly as broken as he was, only now more alone. The point buried in all of this is quieter than the one in the drinking episode, and it is harder to argue with. When the doctor gave Stan a label, the label explained nothing and cured nothing. Calling Stan a cynical jerk did not tell anyone why a happy kid had suddenly stopped finding joy in the world, and it did not give him a single tool to climb back out. The name was a dead end dressed up to look like an answer. The show is suggesting that the modern habit of meeting every hard feeling with a quick label can be a way of pretending to help while doing nothing at all. A label can feel like progress. A label can let the grown-ups feel like they have handled the situation. But Stan walks out of that office with the exact same feeling he walked in with, plus a name for it, and the name does not lighten the load by a single ounce. What makes this more than a cheap shot is that the show clearly takes Stan's pain seriously. The episode does not laugh at him for being sad, and it does not pretend his sadness is fake or silly. The heavy feeling Stan is carrying looks a great deal like real depression, the kind where the color drains out of everything and even good things turn flat and gray. Plenty of people who watched recognized it instantly from their own lives, which is part of why the episode is remembered the way it is. The show respects the feeling enough to refuse a fake cure for it. By not handing Stan a happy ending, the show is saying that some pain is real and deep, and does not get solved by a clever label or a single doctor visit. Treating it as a small thing to be named and filed away would have been the dishonest move, and the writers would not make it. The moment in history matters here too. By 2011, the habit of naming feelings had spread far and wide, and the instinct to take any struggle straight to an expert for a label had become the normal first response. The show was watching a culture that increasingly believed the path out of pain ran through finding the correct word for it. You're Getting Old pokes at that belief by following the word all the way to its end and showing that the word by itself leads nowhere. There is also an unusually honest reason the episode feels so real. The writers built Stan's crisis as a mirror of their own lives. After 15 seasons of making the same kind of show, the two creators were feeling their own version of the gray, used up feeling, the worry that they had seen everything and could not enjoy the work the way they once had. They poured that real exhaustion into a cartoon 10-year-old, which is why the sadness does not feel borrowed. The people making it were feeling it. For anyone who grew up on the show, the lesson sits there without ever being spoken. Not every painful feeling is a sickness waiting for a diagnosis. Some pain is the simple cost of growing up, of seeing through things a person used to believe, of changing in ways that cannot be reversed. A label is not the same as understanding, and a name is not the same as help. The episode teaches this by letting the label fail, completely and on on purpose, so that anyone watching is left holding the same uncomfortable truth Stan is holding, which is that sometimes there is no neat answer, and no expert who can give one. This connects straight back to Randy and the bleeding statue, and seeing the two stories side by side reveals the shape of the show's whole argument. Randy grabbed a label because it gave him comfort and let him stop trying, and it sank him. Stan was handed a label that gave him no comfort at all, and did not even pretend to be a cure, and it left him exactly where it found him. Two opposite experiences, one family, and the same hidden message underneath both. The culture's deep faith that naming a thing is the same as fixing a thing is a faith the show does not share. The drinking episode showed a label that does harm. The aging episode shows a label that does nothing. Together, they begin to build the case the rest of the series keeps making, episode after episode, that the words and labels are not where the help lives. The follow-up episode did not rescue Stan either. The next time the show returned to him, his heavy sadness was still there, and the writers kept refusing to wave it away, which only confirmed how seriously they meant all of it. You're Getting Old has since become one of the episodes fans point to when they want to prove the show is capable of real feeling, and not just noise. It is the moments a cartoon famous for being crude looked straight at the modern habit of labeling pain, and quietly said that the labels do not work, and then sat in the silence afterward instead of cleaning it up. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A label given to a behavior can do harm, and a label given to a feeling can do nothing, and both of those are bad enough. The next thing the show went after was bigger than any single label. It went after the whole machine. The experts, the special process, the deep digging into a person's past to hunt for some buried wound that supposedly explains everything. A boy gets sent to the school counselor for a problem, a team of specialists shows up convinced the real answer is hidden somewhere deep inside him, and the show waits patiently to reveal what actually fixes the boy in the end, which turns out to be the simplest and least dramatic thing of all. Section 3. The machine that dug for a buried hurt. A label given to a person can mislead, and that is bad enough on its own, but sitting behind every label is something larger, a whole belief about how people get fixed. That belief says a real problem can almost never be solved on the surface. The true cause must be hidden somewhere deep, buried in the past, locked away in a memory the person has forgotten. To get better, the belief says, a person needs experts, a special process, and a long, careful dig into the dark corners of the mind to find the secret wound that explains everything. South Park took aim at that whole machine in an episode from 2010, and it built one of its sharpest arguments around a problem as plain and unglamorous as a messy locker. Season 14 put the show squarely in its strongest stretch of years, confident enough to spend a whole episode making fun of an idea most people accept without thinking. The town in these years had a clear go-to helper whenever a kid was in trouble. His name is Mr. Mackey, the school counselor, the soft-spoken man whose job is to sit children down and talk them through their problems. He is the closest thing South Park Elementary has to an in-house healer, the adult everyone trusts to handle the messy feelings. Putting Mackey at the center of a story about fixing broken people was a deliberate choice, because the show was about to suggest that the healer might be the most broken person in the room. The episode is called Inception, and it first aired on October 20th, 2010. The strange name is a joke layered on top of a movie that was huge that year, a film about people entering each other's dreams, dreams tucked inside other dreams, going deeper and deeper into the mind. The show borrowed that idea to poke fun at the notion that the way to heal a person is to keep tunneling further down inside them. The trouble starts small and personal. Stan gets a message from his girlfriend Wendy saying they need to talk, and when they meet, she tells him she cannot take it anymore. Stan has a habit of holding on to things, an enormous pile of useless junk he refuses to part with. At first, this plays like the kind of silly, grown-up overreaction the show loves to mock, the sort of thing where the adults make a huge deal out of nothing. Then the show pulls the rug. An expert opens Stan's locker, and it really is a disaster. Among the trash is a sandwich crawling with maggots and a broken toothbrush, and Stan clings to all of it, unwilling to throw a single piece away, while Wendy breaks down crying. The show makes a careful point of this. Stan's problem is real. The pile is genuinely gross, the worry is genuinely earned, and nobody is making something out of nothing. This matters because the show is not about to argue that the problem is fake. The argument is about how everyone decides to fix it. Stan goes to the school counselor, and the first surprise lands here. Mr. Mackey, the man whose entire job is helping people with their problems, turns out to have the exact same problem, only far worse. His office is so packed with clutter that it is barely fit to sit in. The town's town's healer is a hoarder. From there, the story balloons in the way these stories always seem to, gathering up more people who share the trouble, including a shepherd who keeps a huge flock of sheep. When the shepherd is brought before a serious doctor and explains that the animals are simply his herd, the doctor solemnly corrects him, treating a man who herds sheep for a living as if he were sick. The joke is sharp and quiet. Once a process decides everyone is broken, it starts finding sickness in things that are perfectly normal. Then comes the big idea, the part the whole episode is built to mock. The experts decide the only way to cure these people is to go inside their minds and hunt down the buried memory that started it all. They use a method that drops the patients into a shared dream, and the three of them, Stan, Mackie, and the shepherd, all end up wandering through Mister Mackie's childhood, his old school, and his old home. When that is not deep enough, they go further. Dreams inside dreams, the way the movie did, chasing the secret down level after level. The show treats this exactly as seriously as it deserves, which is to say, not at all. Randy dives into the dream to help and promptly turns into a butterfly, at which point he loses all interest in saving anyone and only wants to chase other butterflies. The whole rescue becomes a circus. The deeper they dig, the sillier and more dangerous it gets, until the dream itself starts turning on them and a man actually dies inside it. A real person loses his life during the great hunt for a buried memory. When the buried memory is finally dug up, the show plays it straight for just a moment because the thing at the bottom is genuinely dark. As a little boy, Mr. Mackie was badly hurt by a grown man wearing the costume of a friendly cartoon owl, a character once used to tell people not to throw trash on the ground, whose whole message was about not littering. The terrible memory was so painful that young Mackie pushed it all the way down and forgot it, but the owl's cheerful slogan about never leaving trash behind got tangled up with the pain, and so, without ever understanding why, Mackie grew up unable to throw anything away. Getting rid of trash had become connected deep in his mind to something awful. That is the hidden cause. That is the buried wound the entire machine existed to find. To pull it free, they needed dream diving experts, layers of danger, and, in the end, the help of a famous horror movie villain known for hunting people inside their nightmares, brought in because he happened to be an expert on dreams. He destroys the owl, the dream collapses, and everyone wakes up. Here is where the episode delivers the move that makes it more than a clever parody of a popular movie. With Mackie sorted out, the experts turn to Stan and announce that it is his turn now, that he too must go through the long process and dig for his own deep hidden reason. Stan looks at all of it, the experts, the dreams, the danger, the death, the dramatic search for a secret cause, and he decides he wants none of it. The show then cuts to Stan simply standing at his locker, throwing the garbage in the trash. That is the whole cure. He takes out the maggot sandwich and the broken toothbrush and the rest of the junk, and he throws it away. The most obvious and boring solution imaginable. The thing anyone could have told him to do on the first day. When Kyle and Wendy find him and ask what his big buried problem turned out to be, Stan says he does not care and does not want any more therapy. Kyle, in the line that holds the entire point of the episode, asks how Stan knows that cleaning out his locker was not his therapy. The dramatic expert pops back into frame one more time to make his big serious sound, and the show ends on the joke, leaving the question hanging in the air on purpose. The way the show builds all this is a steady act of deflation. Every time the process puffs itself up to look important with its serious doctors and its dangerous dream dives and its booming dramatic music, the show lets the air out of it. The expert keeps cueing his own grand musical sting as if every moment were a huge breakthrough, which only makes the whole thing look more ridiculous. The homophone joke about herding and hoarding does quiet work too, showing how easily the machine slaps a sickness label onto a man who is just doing his ordinary job. And the biggest deflation is saved for the end, where the show sets up an enormous, elaborate, deadly process for finding a person's hidden wound, and then has Stan fix himself in 10 seconds by doing the plainest thing a person can do. The point underneath the comedy is not that hidden hurts are fake. Mr. Mackie's terrible memory was real, and the show treats the moment of it with a flash of genuine seriousness before the jokes return. The show is going after something more specific. It is questioning the belief that every problem must have a deep secret cause, and that the only road to getting better runs through digging that cause up with the help of experts and a complicated process. Sometimes, the show suggests, the digging is its own kind of trap. It can turn into an endless inward search that keeps a person stuck, always hunting for the buried reason, while the simple fix sits right in front of them the whole time. Stan did not need to understand the deep psychological story of his hoarding. He needed to throw out the trash. The understanding might come later, or or might never come. And either way, the locker is clean. The moment in history sharpens all of it. By 2010, popular television was full of shows that followed troubled people and dug into the buried causes of their habits. And the broad belief that today's troubles trace back to yesterday's hidden wounds had soaked deep into how people talk about themselves. The movie about diving through layers of the mind had just become a sensation, and South Park reached for it precisely because it captured the spirit of the times. The idea that the answer is always one level deeper down. The episode takes that idea, follows it to the bottom, and finds a man dead and a boy who fixed himself by ignoring the whole thing. What growing up on this kind of story teaches, without ever stating it, is that the long dig is not always the answer, and that acting on a problem can do more than understanding it. The boring, doable thing done now can be worth more than a beautiful explanation found after months of searching. This locks into the two stories that came before it and shows the larger shape forming underneath all three. The drinking story gave a man a label that comforted him and sank him. The aging story gave a boy a label that did nothing at all and left him alone. This one takes on the whole process that those labels live inside, the belief in experts and buried causes and deep healing journeys, and answers it with a kid taking out the garbage. Stan, the same boy who in another story would be handed a useless name and left broken, here refuses the offered process entirely and simply acts, and the show clearly admires him for it. A pattern is now plain across the three. The show keeps doubting the words, the names, and the long dramatic processes, and it keeps pointing instead towards something humble and direct, toward responsibility and plain action, toward doing the dull thing that actually works. Mr. Mackey is the perfect figure to carry this because the town's official healer turns out to be its biggest mess, and even the grand process barely helps him. The man whose whole job is talking children through their feelings is buried alive in his own clutter, dragging a hidden horror behind him that the system can only reach through a dream diving stunt that gets a bystander killed. The show is gently suggesting that the people and processes set up to fix everyone are not nearly as sturdy or as wise as the culture treats them, and that a child with a trash can sometimes outperforms a room full of experts. Inception is remembered mostly as a smart and funny send-up of a famous film, but its real staying power comes from that final question Kyle asks. The question of whether the simple act of cleaning up was the actual cure all along is the show's whole stance on therapy culture, packed into one sentence and handed to the audience to chew on. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So far, the show has gone after the system from the outside, showing how it mislabels people and overcomplicates their healing. The next move flips the camera around. Once a culture decides that a doctor's label is something powerful, something that explains a person and excuses their behavior, a certain kind of person is going to notice. A clever, selfish person will see that label sitting there and realize it is not a burden at all, but a tool, a key that makes every adult in the room back away and hand over whatever is wanted. South Park has exactly that kind of person on the bench, a boy who has spent the whole series turning other people's rules into weapons, and the show was about to let him discover that a few magic words about his own mental health could become the most powerful weapon he had ever held. Section 4, the boy who turned a label into a weapon. Up to this point, the show kept aiming at the system from the outside, showing how it sticks the wrong names on people and tangles their healing into knots. The next idea is colder and sharper. Once a group of people decides that a doctor's label is something powerful, something that explains a person and lets them off the hook for how they act, a certain type of person is going to spot the opening. A selfish, clever person will look at that label and see past the sympathy to the real prize underneath, which is control. The label makes adults soften their voices. It makes them step back and apologize and hand over whatever is being asked for. South Park has the perfect character to walk straight through that open door. A boy who has spent the entire series turning other people's rules into weapons. And the show eventually let him pick up the language of mental health and swing it like a club. Eric Cartman has been the show's great schemer from the start. Across hundreds of episodes, he has figured out that the fastest way to get what he wants is to find a rule, a belief, or a soft spot in the people around him and press on it until they give in. He does not break the system. He reads it, learns its weak points, and uses it exactly as it was built, only for his own ends. So when a culture started treating personal struggles as medical conditions deserving of special care, Cartman was always going to be the one to test how far that could be stretched. The first time he ever met a doctor of the mind, years earlier, the meeting did not go the way such meetings are supposed to. In an episode where Cartman is sent off for help with his temper, the doctor tried the old trick of poking at him, mocking his weight on purpose to make him blow up and reveal his anger. Cartman sat there perfectly perfectly calm. Then, without raising his voice, he set out to ruin the doctor completely, and by the time he was finished, the man's whole life lay in pieces while Cartman walked away untouched. The doctor, looking at the wreckage, decided Cartman was a calm and peaceful boy. The lesson stuck. The therapy chair was not a place where Cartman got handled. It was a place where Cartman did the handling. That earlier visit was the warm-up. The full performance came in season 22, in an episode that first aired on November 28th, 2018, called Buddha Box. By this point, the show had grown more interested in following stories across a whole season, and the world of South Park had filled up with the modern rules of sensitivity, sponsored by a principal who treated hurt feelings as the worst crime imaginable. Into that world walks Cartman, sitting once again across from a doctor of the mind, the same kind of figure who had come off so badly against him before. Cartman lays out his troubles. He talks about all the heavy things that have been happening around town, and then he gets to the real heart of his complaint, which is that the only thing that makes him happy is his cell phone, and people keep getting in the way of it. Other human beings with their talking and their needs keep distracting him from his screen. The doctor listens to all of this and reaches the conclusion that Cartman has anxiety, a word that means a heavy, gnawing worry or nervousness, the kind that can be a real and serious problem for people who truly suffer from it. The trouble is that Cartman does not have it. He has a phone habit and a selfish heart. The doctor gets the name wrong, and that wrong name becomes the most useful thing anyone has ever handed him. What Cartman does with it is a small masterpiece of taking advantage. He treats the diagnosis as a permission slip that excuses everything. He twists a gentle, peaceful greeting that people say, the kind of calm word you might hear at the end of a yoga class, into a phrase that really means something closer to "leave me alone because I have anxiety." The peaceful word becomes a way to wave people off while sounding wise and wounded. When he is out in public and a waiter speaks to him, he is bothered. When a man behind him exists too loudly, he is bothered. When the people of the town, trying to be kind, warn him that he nearly walked into traffic while staring at his phone, he turns on them and screams that their attention has made his anxiety worse. Every ordinary moment of normal human contact gets recast as an attack on his fragile condition. The label lets him be as rude as he likes, while painting himself as the victim of everyone else's rudeness. Then comes the object that gives the episode its name. Cartman discovers a cardboard box he can wear over his head, a box that blocks out the world and holds his phone screen a few inches from his face, so he can stare at it without a single person or sound reaching him. This is the Buddha Box. He wears it everywhere. A boy walking around with a box on his head, completely sealed off from the people around him, and he presents it as treatment, as a tool that helps him cope with his suffering. The genius of his trick is that nobody can argue. The culture he lives in has agreed that mental struggles must be respected and accommodated. So when Cartman claims the box is helping his anxiety, the adults have no ground to stand on. He convinces another boy to get one. He convinces the strict principal, the very man who polices everyone's feelings, to put a box on his own head. He works his way up to the mayor and gets boxes handed out to the whole town. Before long, the streets are full of people wearing cardboard boxes over their heads, each one alone inside the dark with a glowing screen, all of them calling it care for their mental health. The picture the show paints with this is brutal and funny at once. People treating their worry by climbing inside a box that does nothing but feed them more of the exact thing making them anxious. The endless phone, the constant pull of the screen, is the joke drawn out into the open. The supposed cure makes the sickness worse, because the box does not touch the real problem and instead protects it, walls it off, and lets it grow undisturbed. The animation does the heavy lifting again, since the simple sight of a town full of grown people stumbling around blind with boxes on their heads says more than any speech could about how silly the whole thing is. The deadpan way the doctor delivers the wrong diagnosis, the calm way Cartman accepts it and runs, the matter-of-fact spread of the boxes from one head to the next, all of it builds the same points without ever stopping to explain it. Kyle is the one person who refuses to play along, and the show uses him the way it often does, as the marker for the truth. While everyone else nods and accommodates and straps on a box, Kyle can see plainly that using a worry as an excuse to behave badly is foolish, and that Cartman is not suffering from anything except his own awfulness. Kyle stands almost alone in that view for most of the episode, which is part of the point. When a whole culture has agreed to treat every claimed struggle as sacred and beyond question, the person who states the obvious ends up looking like the mean one. The truth teller becomes the villain, and the boy with the box gets the sympathy. That reversal is exactly what the show wants the audience to notice and feel uneasy about. There is a second thread running underneath, with the principal and another adult and their crying babies, and it lands on the same idea from a softer angle. These two grown-ups, busy with their own boxes and their own screens, end up missing real moments in their children's lives because they are sealed away inside their cardboard worlds. When they finally take the boxes off and look up, they realize how much of life they have been hiding from. They try to warn the other parents at a school meeting, only to find that every parent in the room is wearing a box and cannot hear a word. So the two of them simply put their screens down and go live. A picnic, a trip, ordinary time spent paying attention to the people they love. Their cure is the plain, unfashionable act of looking up and being present. The same kind of simple, direct answer the show keeps reaching for. The contrast with Cartman could not be cleaner. They get better by setting the box down. He gets worse by selling boxes to everyone. The point hiding inside all the comedy is not that worry and nervousness are fake, and the show is careful about this. Real anxiety is a real thing that genuinely hurts real people, and the episode never claims otherwise. The aim is narrower and meaner. The show is going after the moment when the language of mental struggle stops being a way to get help and becomes a way to dodge responsibility, to demand special treatment, and to silence anyone who objects. Cartman does not have a condition. He has a choice, the choice to be selfish, and the borrowed label dresses that choice up as something that deserves protection. Once that trick is available, the worst person in any room becomes the most powerful, because the worst person is the most willing to claim the most suffering. The show is warning that a culture eager to honor every reported hurt without ever asking whether it is real hands the keys to its manipulators. The year matters here too. By 2018, talk of mental health had moved to the center of how people spoke about their lives, and the idea of caring for the mind had become widespread and, for the most part, a genuinely good development. Alongside that good change came a quieter problem: the way a serious word could be borrowed by people who simply wanted an excuse, and the way claiming a condition could win a person accommodation and shut down arguments. All of this was tangled up with the phone, the device pulling at everyone's attention, the thing people both could not put down and felt anxious because of. The show grabbed both ideas at once, the misuse of the medical label and the screen that never lets go, and stacked them on top of each other in the image of a person treating their phone problem by burying their face deeper in their phone. What this teaches anyone watching is sharp and a little uncomfortable. Turning every discomfort into a diagnosis does not just fail to help, it arms the people most willing to lie, and it lets everyone else hide from the real trouble instead of facing it. The honest move, the show suggests through Kyle and through the parents who put their boxes down, is to look up, tell the truth, and deal with the actual problem. This snaps into place beside the 3 stories that came before it and shows how far the argument has traveled. Randy reached for a label because it comforted him and let him stop trying, and it dragged him down. Stan was handed a label that brought no comfort and did nothing at all. The whole machine of experts went digging for a buried cause while the real fix sat in plain sight. Now Cartman picks up a label on purpose, knowing full well it is false, and uses it as a tool to control everyone around him. The thread running through all 4 is the same suspicion stated louder each time. The names and the labels are not where the help lives, and treating them as sacred can do real damage, whether by accident or, in Cartman's hands, completely on purpose. The show began by doubting the words. It has arrived at showing how dangerous the words become once a culture agrees never to question them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The boy with the box won because no one was allowed to tell him no. That is the quiet thing the episode leaves behind, the sense that something has gone wrong when stating an obvious truth gets a person treated as cruel. South Park noticed that problem in a single scheming child, but the show had already built something far bigger to explore it, an entire grown-up world organized around the rule that feelings must be protected at any cost. A new principal had marched into town and begun running the school like a fortress, hunting down every word that might wound, punishing anyone who failed to be sensitive enough, and the whole town would soon start building walls of its own, special protected places designed to keep every harsh truth and every unkind comment locked safely outside, where it could never reach a tender feeling again. Section 5. The walls built to keep reality out. The boy with the box won because nobody was allowed to tell him no, and that small victory pointed at a much larger one waiting to happen. If a single child could win by claiming protection from hurt, then a whole community could organize itself the same way, around the rule that feelings must be guarded at any cost and that wounding someone is the gravest sin a person can commit. South Park spent a full stretch of season 19, beginning in 2015, building exactly that community on screen. The show was moving into a new way of telling stories, letting a single idea run across many episodes instead of resetting each week, and it used that longer canvas to draw a town slowly remaking itself himself into a fortress against any word, image, or fact that might bruise a tender feeling. The change arrives with a new man in charge. The episode that starts it all first aired on September 16th, 2015, and it opens with the firing of the old school principal, Principal Victoria, who loses her job for failing to crack down hard enough after a student made a crude joke about a serious crime. In her place marches a character known only as PC Principal, a huge, muscular, aggressive man built like a college frat guy, the kind who shouts and shoves and treats every disagreement as a chance to throw his weight around. The two letters in his name stand for being politically correct, which means following the rule of being so careful with language that nothing a person says could ever possibly offend anyone. He announces that he is going to scrub the town clean of its old rudeness and force everyone to become aware of all the ways they have been hurtful. The joke the show plants from his first second on screen is that the man hired to protect everyone's gentle feelings is the most violent bully in the building. The first person to fall into his sights is Kyle, and the reason is small enough to make the point land hard. Caitlyn Jenner, a real public figure, was being celebrated everywhere at the time as a hero. Kyle says, honestly and without any cruelty, that he does not personally see her as a hero, while making clear he has no problem with people who do. For that mild, harmless opinion, calmly stated, Kyle is hit with weeks of detention. His own father tries to step in to defend him, and when the father slips and uses Jenner's older name, PC Principal turns violent and hurls them both out. The message is set early. There is now a correct thing to feel, and feeling anything else, even quietly, even kindly, is a punishable offense. The strangest and sharpest scene comes when Cartman tries to take the new principal down. Cartman cooks up a scheme to frame PC Principal with a false accusation of a terrible crime against children, a serious and ugly lie. PC Principal barely reacts to it. The fake accusation of something genuinely awful rolls right off him. What sends him into a screaming, fist-throwing rage instead is something tiny. Cartman uses a word that links Italians to threats, and he calls a man a spokesman rather than the more careful spokesperson. These are what the show keeps calling microaggressions, which means tiny comments or word choices that get treated as deeply wounding, even when no harm at all was meant by them. PC Principal ignores the giant false charge and beats Cartman half to death over two small words. The show is making a clean and brutal argument with that contrast. A world this obsessed with policing the smallest possible slight has lost all sense of what actually matters, raging at the harmless while shrugging at the real. By the end of that first episode, the town has surrendered. Kyle, worn down, stands up and publicly agrees that Jenner is a hero, taking back his honest opinion in front of everyone, while the crowd applauds and the principal beams. A brotherhood of aggressive, politically correct frat guys forms in the town, and Randy, always the first to chase any new trend, signs right up. The boys are left admitting that this new way of things is not going to fade away. The community has agreed, under threat, that protecting feelings comes before telling the truth, and the agreement holds. A few episodes later, on October 21st, 2015, the show pushed the same idea from the school out into the wider world and gave it a name people already knew. This episode is about the safe space, which means a place deliberately built to keep out anything upsetting, anything critical, anything that might make a person feel bad about themselves. It begins with Cartman, of all people, in tears. He has posted a shirtless photo of himself lifting weights online, and strangers have left harsh comments about his body. Cartman, the boy who has spent his whole life dishing out cruelty, sobs to PC Principal about how much the mean words hurt. The principal's solution is to assign poor Butters the job of going through Cartman's online accounts and deleting every negative comment, then gathering up only the kind ones and printing them out so Cartman never has to see anything but praise. The job grows. Butters is soon filtering the online lives of a whole list of famous people, scrubbing away every unkind word so the celebrities can float through their days hearing nothing but applause. And here the show plays its cruelest and most honest card. All that ugliness does not simply vanish when Butters deletes it. Somebody has to read it. Butters, the gentlest character in the show, spends his nights wading through an endless flood of the darkest, meanest things people write, absorbing all of it so that the protected ones never have to feel a thing. The weight of it crushes him. The boy, forced to soak up everyone else's pain, is pushed to the very edge, nearly broken by the darkness he has been made to carry alone. The people inside the safe bubble stay comfortable and clueless, while the one doing the protecting quietly falls apart. The show is pointing straight at a hidden cost. Shielding some people from all harshness does not erase the harshness. It just dumps it onto someone else. Randy carries a second version of the same story. Every time he shops at a fancy new grocery store, the workers and activists corner him and pressure him to donate to one cause after another, making him feel guilty guilty and exposed and judged for not giving. He hates feeling that way, so he too goes hunting for a safe space, somewhere the uncomfortable pressure of the world cannot reach him. At one point, he films a public message complaining about being shamed. Standing surrounded by starving children, he still does not want to help, while a celebrity nearby remarks that the hungry kids are at least lucky to be so thin. The show is stacking up its picture of people who have decided that the chief goal of life is to never ever feel uncomfortable, no matter who has to pay for that comfort. The whole thing builds to a villain, and the choice of villain is the entire point packed into one character. The threat to everyone's safe spaces takes the form of a person who represents reality itself, the plain harshness of the actual world, the part of life that does not care about your feelings and will tell you hard truths whether you want them or not. This figure of reality wants to tear the safe spaces down, to let the real world back in. To the comfortable people inside their bubbles, he is a monster, so they capture him, and to keep their protected world intact, they put reality to death. They execute the truth so they never have to face it again, and a cheerful song and dance number plays them through it. A bright, happy tune celebrating the killing of reality so that no feeling ever has to be heard again is about as dark a joke as the show has ever told, and it is delivered with a smile. How the show builds these episodes drives the meaning home. PC Principal is drawn and performed as a hulking, screaming bully, precisely so the audience cannot miss the contradiction at the center of him, the guardian of gentle feelings who solves everything with his fists. In the safe space story, turning reality into a living person who can be hunted and hanged takes an idea that usually hides behind soft words and forces it into the open, where its cost becomes impossible to ignore. The upbeat song laid over the dark act is the show's favorite trick, the cheerful surface clashing with the grim thing underneath so the gap between them does the talking. Nothing has to be explained. The images carry the argument. The point sitting beneath the comedy is not that cruelty is fine or that no feeling deserves care. The show is going after something more specific and more uncomfortable. Walling people off from every criticism, every hard truth, every unkind word does not make them stronger. It makes them weaker, thinner skinned, less able to handle the ordinary bumps of being alive, until even a mild, honest opinion or a stray comment can knock them flat. The celebrities in the safe space, protected from all negativity, become helpless crybabies who cannot survive a single harsh word. The town under PC Principal grows so frightened of giving offense that it loses the ability to say anything true, and the people who suffer most are the honest ones. Kyle punished for a calm opinion, Butters destroyed by the cruelty he is forced to absorb so others can stay clean. A world organized around protecting feelings ends up rewarding the offended and punishing the truthful, and at the far end of that road waits the killing of reality itself. The moment in time gave the show all the fuel it needed. Around 2015, schools and colleges were arguing loudly about safe spaces, about warning people before showing them anything difficult, and about those tiny slights now being treated as serious wounds. The celebration of Caitlyn Jenner was everywhere, and the pressure to join in or stay silent was real. The show walked into the middle of that conversation and asked its usual blunt question, which was what all this protection actually does to the people it claims to help. The answer the episodes give is that being shielded from hardship is not a gift. People grow sturdy by meeting difficult things and surviving them, by hearing the criticism and weighing it, by letting reality in even when it stings. A person wrapped in cotton and kept from every cold wind does not become strong. They become someone who shatters the first time the wind finds them. That is the lesson buried in the cartoon, taught by showing a town that tried to lock out the truth and ended up putting it to death. This locks into everything that came before and shows how the argument has grown from a single person to a whole society. Randy grabbed a label for comfort and sank. Stan was handed a label that did nothing. The machine dug for buried causes while the simple fix waited. Cartman picked up a label and swung it as a weapon. Now an entire town picks up the same instinct, the urge to soften and shield and protect feelings above all else, and builds it into laws and walls and a brotherhood of enforcers. And the result is a community at war with the truth. Cartman fits right into this world too. The boy who cried for protection from mean comments and the principal who hands out that protection feed each other perfectly. The manipulative manipulator, and the system locking together. The show's steady answer hums underneath it all. The same answer from the drinking and the aging and the dug-up wound. Face the real thing. Take the hard truth on the chin. The comfort the culture keeps reaching for is the very thing keeping everyone weak. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Letting reality back in is painful, and the show knows it, which is why it keeps insisting on it anyway. South Park watched a town try to wall out every harsh truth, and found the walls turning people fragile and cruel and false. But there was one more shape this instinct could take. One more way the urge to protect people could curdle into something rotten. A whole industry had grown up around defending the weak and stamping out cruelty. An industry of kind-faced helpers and inspiring speakers and feel-good campaigns. The show was about to walk into one of those campaigns, point at the person standing proudly at the front of it, the great champion against bullies, and reveal that the loudest defender of the wounded was the biggest bully in the entire room. Section 6. The bully who came to stop bullying. Letting reality back in is the hard road, and a town that refuses it grows fragile and false. But the urge to protect people had one more disguise left to wear, the kindest looking one of all. By the time the show reached this idea, a whole industry had sprung up in the real world around defending the weak and stamping out cruelty. An industry of counselors and inspiring speakers and slick awareness campaigns, all of it draped in good intentions. South Park walks straight into the heart of that industry in an episode from 2012, and found something rotten sitting at the very center of it. A champion against cruelty who was the cruelest person in the building. Season 16 put the show in a strong, sure-footed stretch, comfortable enough to take a beloved cause and turn it over to look at the dirty underside. The town's familiar school counselor, Mr. Mackey, the same soft-spoken man who had once been buried alive in his own clutter, is back in his usual role here, the adult who is supposed to handle the children's troubles. The episode, which first aired on April 11th, 2012, begins with a real and serious problem, the kind the show takes care to treat as real before it starts swinging. Butters, the sweetest and most defenseless kid in the whole show, turns up at school with a black eye. His friends find out he is being bullied, that someone has taken his lunch money 3 days running and left a mark on his face. This is genuine. A small, gentle boy is being hurt, and the hurt is not a joke. The first twist lands fast and lands dark. When Stan and Kyle urge Butters to go to his family for help, the family turns out to be the source of the harm. Butters has a grandmother visiting that week, a sweet-seeming old woman who fusses over him kindly whenever other people are around. The moment they are alone, she becomes a monster. She is the one stealing his money and hurting him, putting on a loving mask in front of others and dropping it the instant the witnesses leave. The person society would tell Butters to run to for safety is the very person making him bleed, and she has built herself a perfect cover by playing the part of the caring grandma in public. Butters has nowhere to turn, because the system that is supposed to catch a bully only sees the sweet old lady everyone adores. Into this real, ugly situation strides the hero of the anti-cruelty industry. Somebody quietly calls in Bucky Bailey, the founder of an organization called Bully Buckers, a professional anti-bullying counselor who travels around fighting cruelty wherever he finds it. When Bucky first appears in Mr. Mackey's office, he seems reasonable enough. Then Mr. Mackey gently mentions that he had been planning an assembly about positive thinking rather than Bucky's chosen topic. Bucky responds by tearing into Mr. Mackey with a stream of vicious insults until the poor counselor is reduced to tears. The great enemy of bullying bullies the first person who mildly disagrees with him, and he does it within a minute of arriving. The contradiction the show drew with PC Principal returns here in a new costume. The loudest defender of the wounded is, underneath the speeches and the cause, a wounder himself. The assembly that follows makes the rot impossible to miss. Bucky stands in front of the whole school and announces that the students will make an anti-bullying video. When no child volunteers to lead it, Bucky does not gently encourage them. He starts taunting and mocking the kids, flapping his arms and clucking like a chicken to call them all cowards, jeering at a room full of children until the humiliation works and a child caves. Stan finally volunteers, worn down the same way Bucky wears everyone down. The man brought in to stop bullies has bullied an entire auditorium of kids into doing what he wants. The cause has become a license. As long as Bucky waves the flag of kindness, he can be as cruel as he likes and no one is allowed to call it what it is. Stan goes off and makes the video, and it turns into a flashy, expensive musical spectacle, more concerned with looking impressive than with helping anyone. Stan props up his big message with a frightening number about how many kids are too scared to go to school each day, a statistic that sounds powerful and appears to be invented on the spot. The video carries a message so harsh that it folds right back back on itself. A command shouted at bullying, telling it to destroy itself. A cruel taunt dressed up as a kind crusade. An anti-cruelty campaign somehow produced something mean. Kyle, who has been quietly uneasy the whole time, finally asks the one question that pops the entire balloon. If the goal is really to help kids and stop bullying, he asks Stan, why not simply put the video online for free where everyone could see it? Stan stumbles, has no good answer, and brushes the question aside, because the truth is that the goal stopped being about helping anyone a while ago. A Hollywood studio wants to buy the video. There is money in the cause now, and money has quietly replaced the kids the campaign was supposed to be for. Then the industry eats its own. Once the video is worth something, Bucky Bailey comes back and claims it belongs to him and his organization, that the whole idea was his and the profit should be his. He corners Stan in the school bathroom and berates him over the money and the credit, grinding the boy down until Stan breaks and cries. The anti-bullying crusader has now, on screen, bullied the school counselor to tears, bullied a room of children into submission, and bullied a kid into sobbing over a paycheck. Every single thing he does is the exact thing he claims to be fighting, and the cause is the perfect shield that lets him do it while everyone applauds him as a hero. The real story, the one that actually matters, has been running quietly underneath the loud campaign the whole time, and it gets solved without any of the industry's help at all. Butters, still being tormented by his grandmother, finally has to face the thing himself. He works up the nerve to confront her, even putting on his secret costumed alter ego to find the courage, though his first attempt goes badly because he is still too frightened to truly stand up. In the end though, Butters comes to understand something about the woman hurting him. Her cruelty traces back to her own childhood, to a time when she was bullied and made to feel small, and she has spent her life passing that pain down to someone weaker, the way it had been passed down to her. Butters makes the choice that breaks the chain. He refuses to become cruel in return, refuses to carry the meanness forward to the next person, and he quietly decides to outlast her rather than join her. That private act of courage, done with no campaign and no cameras and no counselor, is what actually ends his suffering. The slick anti-bullying machine did nothing for the one real victim in the whole episode. The victim saved himself. How the show builds all this is a steady stripping away of disguises. Bucky is presented as calm and reasonable at first so that his cruelty lands harder when it surfaces, the mask slipping right in front of the audience. The grandmother does the same trick in reverse, sweet for the crowd and vicious in private, which shows how easily real cruelty hides behind a pleasant face. The big musical video is shot to look polished and important and self-congratulating, all surface and no substance, so the audience can feel how hollow it is. And the quiet, unglamorous scenes of Butters facing his grandmother are deliberately small and plain next to the loud spectacle of the campaign, which is the whole point. The real solving of the real problem looks nothing like the flashy industry built around solving it. The point underneath is not that bullying is fine or that protecting children is wrong. The show is careful to make Butters a genuine victim suffering genuine harm. The aim is the industry itself, the booming business of professional kindness, with its speakers and campaigns and awareness videos, and the way that whole machine can become hollow, self-serving, and even cruel, while wrapping itself in the language of caring. The people who shout loudest about stopping cruelty, the show warns, are sometimes the cruelest of all, because the cause gives them cover and makes them untouchable. Meanwhile, the actual victims, the Butters of the world being hurt at home where no campaign can see, get ignored, because helping them quietly does not sell videos or fill auditoriums. The cure that works turns out to be the same kind of cure the show always favors, a private, courageous, personal act. A small boy deciding for himself not to pass the pain along. The moment in time gave the episode its target. Around 2012, the anti-bullying movement had reached a peak in the real world, with awareness campaigns everywhere, celebrities filming earnest messages, and a well-known documentary putting the issue in front of huge audiences. A great deal of it was genuinely well meant, but the show, as always, asked whether the loud public machine actually reached the kid being hurt in private, or whether it had become its own kind of performance, a way for people to feel like heroes and, in some cases, to make money. The lesson it leaves is uncomfortable and useful. A campaign is not the same as caring. Wearing the badge of a good cause does not make a person good, and it can hide a person who is the opposite. Real help is usually quiet, unglamorous, and personal, and the people most eager to be seen fighting cruelty deserve a second, closer look. This snaps cleanly into the picture the earlier sections built. The town that walled out reality had its protectors who were really aggressors. The muscular principal who guarded gentle feelings with his fists. Here the same shape appears in the anti-bullying crusade crusader who fights cruelty by being cruel, the helper revealed as a harmer, and the cure echoes the dug-up locker from the story about the buried hurt. Just as Stan healed himself by skipping the grand process and simply throwing out the trash, Butters heals himself by skipping the grand campaign and simply finding the courage to face the person hurting him. The apparatus of caring, the experts and counselors and campaigns, keeps coming up empty in this show, and the plain personal act keeps being the thing that works. The argument has held steady across every story. The labels, the systems, the loud public machines, none of them are where the help lives. The help lives in a person taking honest, direct action on their own real problem. The man who came to stop bullies turned out to be the worst bully of all, and the cause he carried was the very thing that let him get away with it. That is the warning the episode leaves behind. The sense that the kindest sounding movements can hide the unkindest people, and that good intentions printed on a banner do not make the person holding it good. South Park had now picked apart the labels, the process, the weaponized excuse, the protective walls, and the hollow campaigns. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But there was one final form of the same instinct waiting to be examined, and it was the gentlest and most flattering of them all. Instead of telling a struggling person they were sick or fragile or wounded, this idea told them something that felt wonderful to hear, that there was nothing wrong with them at all, that they did not need to change a single thing, that they should simply accept themselves exactly as they were. The show was about to follow that comforting message to its end, to a man diving to the bottom of the ocean in search of a standard the whole world kept lowering, and to a future where the cure for a real problem was a cheerful song insisting the problem was not a problem at all. Section 7. The kindest way to keep someone stuck. Every shape the instinct had taken so far carried at least a little sting. Being called sick stings. Being labeled, being silenced, being bullied by a fake helper, all of it carries some discomfort. But the urge to protect people had one last form to take, and it was the softest and most flattering of them all, the version that feels purely good to hear. Instead of telling a struggling person that something is wrong with them, this version tells them the opposite. It says there is nothing to fix, nothing to change, nothing to be ashamed of. It says to simply accept yourself exactly as you are. South Park chased that warm, comforting message across more than a decade, from an episode in 2012 to a special in 2024, and in both it arrived at the same uneasy conclusion. The kindest sounding message can be the one that keeps a person stuck right where they are. Season 16 produced the first of the pair, an episode that first aired on October 3rd, 2012. It begins with the boys out shopping, noticing how many heavy people are getting around on motorized scooters. Cartman, after a doctor warns him about his weight, draws the lesson that suits him best. Rather than deciding to eat better or move more, he decides he is entitled to a scooter of his own, that his size has earned him a special ride and special treatment. He claims the scooter as a right. Then he goes further, using his situation to grab whatever he can, taking trips and even suing a store because its bathroom door was not built wide enough for him. Cartman has discovered that presenting himself as a victim of his own body opens doors and hands him privileges, and that this is far easier than changing anything about himself. The attitude spreads, and soon heavy people across the country are claiming the same comforts and the same exemptions. Kyle is the one who notices what is happening to everyone's standards, and he says the line the whole episode turns on. Something, he observes, has lowered the bar so far that nobody feels any shame anymore. People are behaving worse and worse and feeling fine about it, because the rule of the day is that no one should ever be made to feel bad about themselves. Stan points out sensibly that the bar is only a figure of speech, not a real object sitting somewhere in the world. The show then does the thing it loves most, which is to take a figure of speech and make it real. A famous film director, James Cameron, decides that the societal bar must be an actual physical thing, and he sets off on a deep-sea expedition to find it and lift it back up. His crew keeps trying to explain that the bar is just an expression, that there is no real bar to raise, and Cameron ignores every word, diving deeper than any human ever has into the dark of the ocean. The reality television thread runs alongside this and sharpens the point about lowered standards. A real young reality star, a child famous for a show about her loud and messy family, is a huge hit, the kind of trashy entertainment people cannot stop watching. Cartman, jealous of the attention, ends up in a televised spaghetti wrestling match against her at an event about fighting obesity, hosted by the First Lady. The show is piling up its picture of a culture that has stopped expecting anything good from anyone, that turns the lowest behavior into prime entertainment and applauds it, because expecting better might make somebody feel judged. The ending swings on what Cameron does at the bottom of the sea. Against all sense, he actually finds the bar and raises it. The instant he does, something something shifts in everyone. Suddenly, people no longer find Cartman and the reality star entertaining. A mother looks at her own child behaving like an animal and at her own choices, and feels a wave of horror at how far she let things slide. Shame returns to the world, and with it, something the show clearly values: a return of dignity. People begin to expect more of themselves again. The lesson the episode lands on is one most modern stories would never dare touch. A certain amount of shame, a bar held high enough that falling short of it stings, is not cruelty. It is the very thing that pushes people to be better. And a world that throws shame away in the name of kindness ends up dragging everyone down into the muck together. 12 years later, the show returned to the same idea with a sharper, more pointed knife in a special that premiered on May 24th, 2024. Once again, Cartman sits in a doctor's office, once again with his mother beside him, and once again a doctor warns that his weight has become a real danger to his health. This time, though, there is a real medicine that could help, a drug that genuinely shrinks appetite and helps heavy people lose weight. The catch is the price. For someone in Cartman's situation, it costs around $1,200 a month, and his mother cannot begin to afford it. So the doctor offers a substitute, and the substitute is the whole argument of the episode in a single brutal joke. He prescribes a singer. He tells Cartman to listen to a famous body positivity artist several times a day and to watch her videos before bed. And he says Cartman will have to stay on this for the rest of his life. The real medicine goes to those who can pay. Everyone else gets a song telling them to love themselves the way they are. Cartman names the unfairness of it plainly, observing that rich people get the real drug while poor people get body positivity. That line is the spine of the whole special. Body positivity, the warm message that there is nothing wrong with you and you should accept yourself completely, gets handed out here as the cheap thing, the consolation prize for people who cannot afford to actually be helped. The boys then spend a long, miserable stretch trying to fight through the maze of the healthcare system to get the real drug, drowning in forms and phone calls and refusals, and the show is plainly furious about that maze, about a system that puts real help out of reach for ordinary people, and then tells them to be happy with a song instead. The cruelty of that system is one of the special's true targets, and the show does not let it off the hook. The other target is who benefits from the comforting message: a boardroom of cheerful cereal mascots. The cartoon characters who sell sugary food to children feel threatened by the new weight loss drugs, because a world full of people losing weight is a world buying less of their product. So they take up the banner of body positivity themselves, preaching the gospel of loving your body exactly as it is, not out of kindness, but because it keeps people eating their cereal. The warm message of self-acceptance, in their mouths, becomes a sales tool, a way to keep customers comfortable and unchanged and consuming. The people pushing the idea that nothing is wrong with you turn out to profit handsomely from you staying exactly the way you are. And the special ends with Kyle, of all people, deciding that since it is not fair to blame anyone for their weight, the whole school, the whole society, should simply agree never to make fun of obesity again. Which means, in the end, that Cartman gets the one thing he always wanted: a world where no one is allowed to point at his behavior at all. How the show builds both of these is its signature move, taking a soft idea and forcing it into hard physical form so its shape becomes visible. Making the bar a real object that a man can dive down and lift turns a vague worry about standards into something the audience can watch happen. Prescribing a singer as if she were medicine turns the abstract idea of body positivity into a literal pill, which exposes how the gentle message is being used as a replacement for real help. The cheerful musical numbers, one about the misery of the healthcare maze and others throughout, carry their grim points wrapped in bright tunes, the contrast doing the work. And casting friendly cereal mascots as the preachers of self-love makes the hidden motive impossible to miss. The point underneath is genuinely layered, and getting it right matters. The show is not simply saying that heavy people should feel ashamed, and it would be a misreading to take it there. In the newer special especially, the show aims real anger at the system that makes honest help so expensive and so hard to reach, and it has clear sympathy for people stuck with no good options. The narrower, sharper claim is about the message of total self-acceptance itself, and about what that message does when it becomes the only thing on offer. Telling a struggling person that nothing is wrong and nothing needs to change can be a way of abandoning them dressed up as kindness. It can be a comfort handed over precisely so that nobody has to do the harder work of actually helping. And it is a message that serves the people selling it, the companies and the manipulators, far more than it serves the person being told it. Cartman, the great taker of advantage, embraces body acceptance for the same reason he embraced a fake anxiety, because it gets him what he wants while asking nothing of him. The two most moments in time bracket the idea neatly. In 2012, the show was watching a culture lower its standards in the name of letting everyone feel okay, turning trash into entertainment and feeling guilty about ever expecting better. By 2024, the show was watching the booming world of weight loss drugs collide with the message of body positivity, and noticing who got the real cure and who got the comforting song. The lesson it leaves across both is one the modern world finds hard to hear. Self-acceptance has a limit past which it stops helping and starts trapping. A little shame, a bar held high, an honest expectation that a person can do better, these are not the enemies of a good life. They are part of how people grow. A message that removes all of them, that insists nothing is ever wrong and nothing ever needs to change, sounds like love and can function like a cage, especially when the people selling it profit from the door staying shut. This is the gentlest version of the very same instinct every earlier section traced, and seeing it as the soft end of one long line is the whole point. The drinking label, the aging label, the buried wound machine, the weaponized excuse, the protective walls, the hollow campaigns, and now the warm command to stay the same. All of them are the culture reaching for comfort instead of hard truth. The first one's reached with a little sting. This one reaches with a smile and a song, which makes it the most seductive and the hardest to argue against, because arguing against it sounds like arguing against kindness itself. Cartman thrives in it for exactly that reason, and the show's steady answer, unchanged across nearly 20 years and every kind of story, hums underneath one more time. Face the real thing. Do the hard work. Keep the bar where it belongs. The comfort everyone keeps grabbing for is the thing keeping them stuck. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A fair-minded person watching all of this stack up might start to feel a strong objection rising, and it is an objection worth taking seriously rather than waving away. It might look, from a certain angle, as though the show is simply being cruel. It might seem to mock the very people who are hurting most, to laugh at the sad and the struggling and the genuinely sick, to side with the bullies against the wounded. That charge is the most serious one anybody can level at all of this, and answering it honestly, without dodging, is the only way to find out what South Park actually believes underneath the endless jokes, and whether there is any real heart beating beneath the meanness. Section 8. The heart beneath the meanness. The objection is not a weak one, and pretending it is would be dishonest. Stacked up the way these stories have been, the pattern can look ugly. A show that pokes at the disease label, the diagnosis, the buried wound dig, the protected feelings, the kindness campaigns, and the message of self-acceptance can start to seem like a show that just enjoys kicking people while they are down. South Park built its entire reputation on shock and offense. It has spent decades saying the things polite people will not say, aiming its jokes at the sick, the sad, the disabled, the grieving, and at real public figures by name. A reasonable person watching all of it could easily decide that there is no kindness anywhere in it, that the show simply sneers at anyone soft enough to be hurting and laughs hardest at the most vulnerable people in the room. That charge deserves a real answer, not a clever dodge, because if it is true, then everything traced so far is just cruelty wearing the costume of an argument. The surface case for that charge is strong. The show really is mean. It really does reach for the most shocking possible version of nearly every joke. It has mocked dead people, real tragedies, religious beliefs held sacred by millions, and the appearance and pain of named individuals. Nothing about its tone announces that it cares. There are no gentle voices, no soft music guiding the audience towards sympathy most of the time. No obvious signal that the people making it have any tenderness at all. A viewer who took the show at its loudest and crudest would have every reason to call it heartless, and it would be lazy to wave that reaction away as a simple misunderstanding. The meanness is real. The question is whether meanness is the whole of it, or whether the show is drawing a line somewhere that the charge misses. It is drawing a line, and the line is the most important thing in this entire argument. The show makes a careful, consistent split between the person who is genuinely suffering and the machine that has been built up around suffering. The genuine sufferer, again and again, gets treated with a tenderness the show shows almost nowhere else. The machine, the labels, and the experts, and the campaigns, and the profiteers, and the people faking pain for gain gets the full force of the mockery. Once that split comes into focus, the cruelty stops looking random and starts looking aimed. The show is not laughing at the hurting. It is laughing at the things being sold to the hurting, and at the people doing the selling. The clearest proof sits in the story about the boy who turned 10 and watched his world go gray. When South Park, the show famous above all for never taking anything seriously, finally reached a raw and real depiction depiction of deep sadness, the kind that hollows a person out and steals the color from everything, it did the one thing nobody expected. It played it completely straight. There was no punchline waiting at the bottom of Stan's despair. There was no joke to undercut the ache, no silly twist to let the audience off the hook, no tidy cure to make it all better before the credits. The episode ended on a real and mournful song, and on a family quietly breaking apart, and it left the boy exactly as broken as it found him, because that is how the feeling actually works. The people who made it poured their own real exhaustion into that story, their own version of the gray, used up feeling. A show that wanted to laugh at depression had the perfect chance to do it, and instead chose to honor the pain by refusing to cheapen it. That single choice tells more about the show's heart than 100 shocking jokes tell about its supposed cruelty. The same care shows up wherever a real victim appears. The hoarding boy had a problem that was genuinely real, gross, and sad and worrying, and the show made sure the audience felt that before it ever mocked the dream diving experts. The buried hurt at the bottom of the counselor's mind was treated with a flash of true seriousness, a brief, quiet acknowledgement that something terrible had happened to a child before the comedy returned. And in the story about the protected celebrities and their walls, the show's sympathy did not sit with the comfortable famous people hiding from criticism. It sat entirely with Butters, the gentle boy crushed under the weight of all the cruelty he was forced to absorb so that others could stay clean. The show mocked the safe space and grieved for the kid destroyed by it. In the same episode, without confusing the two, it knew the difference between the people gaming the system and the person actually being hurt, and it put its heart with the one being hurt. The list of who the show actually attacks, gathered across all these stories, makes the aim unmistakable. Cartman the schemer gets mocked for faking conditions and grabbing entitlements, for the lie and the manipulation, never for any real pain because he has none. The cereal mascots get mocked for preaching self-love to keep people buying their product. The anti-bullying crusader gets mocked for being a bully behind the cause. The muscular principal gets mocked for guarding feelings with his fists. The healthcare maze gets mocked with real anger for putting genuine help out of reach of ordinary people while offering them a song instead. Every one of these targets is a person or a system holding power, profiting, lying, or enforcing. The show punches at the strong and the dishonest and the self-serving, the genuinely weak and genuinely hurting. When the show can tell them apart from the fakers, it tends to protect. Underneath all of it sits a belief, and it is a harder and more demanding kind of belief than the one the show keeps mocking. The show seems to think people are stronger than the culture gives them credit for. It trusts that a person can hear a hard truth and survive it, can be told they have a real problem and rise to fix it, can carry a real grief without being wrapped in cotton, can face reality and come out tougher for it. That trust is a form of respect, even when it arrives dressed in a joke. The gentle culture the show keeps poking at treats people as fragile, as things that will shatter if handled roughly, and the show keeps insisting the opposite, that treating people as fragile is what actually makes them fragile. Calling that belief cruel gets it backwards. Expecting strength from someone is a way of believing in them. For all its rough surface, the show has a long history of letting its characters end an episode by admitting, plainly and without shame, that they learned something real that day, and it keeps a steady moral voice in Kyle, the boy who says the true thing while everyone else goes along with the comfortable lie. A show with no heart does not bother having a conscience. Honesty requires admitting the limit too, because the objection is not pure nonsense. South Park is a savage comedy that paints in enormous, brutal strokes, and a tool that blunt does not always land exactly where it aims. There are times the show overshoots, when a joke meant for a system or a hypocrite splashes onto a real person who did not deserve it, when the desire to be shocking outruns the point being made. It is not a careful instrument, and it is never claimed to be. The people who find it genuinely hurtful in places are not all simply missing the joke. A fair look has to hold both things at once, that the show draws a real and meaningful line between the sufferer and the machine, and that its weapons are crude enough to sometimes cut the wrong target on the way to the right one. Granting that second part does not collapse the argument, it just keeps the argument honest. When both things are held together, the shape of the whole becomes clear and it answers the charge. The cruelty is mostly aimed at the comfort the culture is selling, at the false labels and the hollow campaigns and the flattering lies and the people profiting from all of it. The tenderness, quieter and rarer and easy to miss, shows up for the person who is actually in pain. A heartless show would have laughed at Stan's gray and empty world. A heartless show would have made Butters the punchline instead of the casualty. A heartless show would have sided with the comfortable famous people instead of the kid drowning in their discarded cruelty. The show did none of those things, and it did the opposite on purpose, which means means the meanness is a method rather than the message. The method is to mock the lies people tell each other about pain. The message, buried under all the noise, is that real pain deserves real honesty, and that real care means telling people the truth and trusting them to handle it. This locks the whole argument into place. Every section traced the same instinct, the urge to soothe rather than to be honest, the reach for comfort over hard truth, and showed it failing in form after form, from the disease label that sank Randy to the song that kept everyone stuck. The cruelty objection seemed for a moment like it might unravel all of that by recasting the show as simply spiteful. Instead, looking closely at where the cruelty lands and where it pulls back reveals the belief underneath, the same belief the whole essay has been circling. The show distrusts the gentle, the soft, the protective, and the flattering, because it has watched all of those things make people weaker, and it reserves its rare tenderness for the moments when pain is real, and a person needs the truth more than they need a hug, which is the show's roughneck way of caring. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So the heart is there, beating under the meanness, and it beats for a specific idea about how people get strong and how they get stuck. But knowing that the show believes this raises a far larger question, one that reaches well past the cartoon itself. Millions of kids grew up on this show, watching it work this argument into their heads year after year, absorbing its deep distrust of labels and comfort and protection long before any of them had the words to describe what they were learning. Those kids are adults now. They walked out of childhood and straight into a world that had decided to embrace, completely and everywhere, the exact ideas the show had spent their whole lives warning them about. And what that collision did to an entire generation is the biggest part of this story still left to tell. Section 9. The generation raised to doubt. South Park has been on the air for close to 30 years. A child who started watching it young is now well into adulthood, maybe raising children of their own. And across that entire span, the show kept working the same argument into the background of their lives. Year after year, season after season, it poked at the disease label, the diagnosis, the buried wound dig, the protected feelings, the kindness campaigns, and the flattering message of self-acceptance. Most of the kids absorbing all of this had no idea they were learning anything. They thought they were watching a rude cartoon. But ideas repeated for decades sink in whether a person notices or not, and an entire generation grew up with this particular suspicion quietly wired into them, long before any of them could have explained what it was. Part of what gave the message its grip is that the same two people steered the show for almost its whole life, and one of them wrote and directed the large majority of these episodes himself. That is unusual for a show running this long, and it matters here because it means the worldview never drifted into a committee blur. The same mind kept circling the same worry from new angles, which gave the argument a consistency most television never has. The show also aged in step with the people watching it. The kids who found it at 10 grew up while it kept running, and the show seemed to grow with them, moving from pure shock humor in its early years toward the sharper, sadder, more thoughtful stories of its middle and later seasons. So the audience did not just absorb a fixed lesson once, they received it again and again at every age in a slightly more grown-up form each time. The way a person absorbs the values of a parent who keeps repeating the same handful of beliefs across a whole childhood. The timing of it is the part that turns this from a story about a cartoon into a story about a culture. The show did not poke at these ideas at random, it tracked them as they rose, hitting each one close to the moment it crested in the real world. It questioned the idea of being powerless over a problem back in 2005, when that way of thinking was already common but rarely challenged out loud. It went after the world of awareness campaigns and lowered standards around 2012, when those campaigns were everywhere. It took on safe spaces and the policing of tiny offenses in 2015, right as those arguments were filling schools and news feeds. And it landed on body acceptance as a substitute for real help in 2024, in the middle of the weight loss drug frenzy. The show was not looking backward at dead trends. It kept its aim on whatever was rising, which means that for almost 3 decades, it was watching a single thing grow in the culture and reporting back on it in real time. The ideas the show kept needling did not shrink over those years. They spread, and they kept spreading, until they became the normal way much of the world talks about pain, struggle, and the self. What that did to the kids who watched is harder to prove than the timeline, and it deserves to be stated as a reading rather than a fact, but the reading is a strong one. A generation raised inside this show seems to have come out the other side with a reflex, a built-in flicker of doubt that fires whenever the soft, comforting version of an idea shows up. Hand someone raised on the show a warm, flattering message about loving themselves exactly as they are, and some part of them squints. Show them a loud public campaign against cruelty, and they wonder who is profiting benefiting, and whether the person leading it is as kind as they claim. Offer them a tidy label for a messy feeling, and they suspect the label is a dead end. Hear someone reach too quickly for a serious word like trauma or anxiety to describe an ordinary bad day, and they feel the old suspicion stir. Tell them they are powerless, and something in them pushes back. They learn to distrust the easy comfort before they ever learned why, and they carried that distrust into a world that had decided almost completely to embrace the very things the show had taught them to question. That instinct has a real use, and on its good days, it works like a kind of clear sight. The person who can spot the hollow campaign, the flattering lie, the comfort being sold by someone who profits from it is harder to fool and harder to trap. A generation primed to ask whether the gentle message is actually helping or just soothing is, in some ways, better armored against being taken advantage of. The show handed its viewers a useful tool, the habit of looking past the kind words to the thing underneath, and plenty of them use it well. Some of the sharpest, funniest, least foolable people around grew up quoting this show, and that is not an accident. But the armor has a cost, and this is where the story turns dark, because a tool that doubts everything soft can end up doubting the things a person genuinely needs. Someone trained from childhood to suspect every comforting message, to sneer at earnestness, to assume the helper is a hypocrite and the label is a trap, might also wave away real help when their own moment of real pain arrives. They might be unable to take their own sadness seriously, treating it as weakness to be mocked rather than a wound to be tended. They might reach for a joke the instant a real feeling surfaces, using humor the way the show uses it, as a way to keep the painful thing at arm's length. They might mistake their reflexive doubt for wisdom and wear their cynicism like a badge, when underneath it they are just as hurt and just as stuck as anyone else. The instinct that protects a person from being fooled by false comfort can also wall them off from true comfort, and a generation that learned only the lesson of distrust would be a generation quietly starving for the very honesty it was taught to mock. The strange and important thing is that the show itself saw this danger and warned against it in the most serious episode it ever made. The story of the boy who turned 10 and watched his whole world rot into garbage is, underneath everything else, a story about exactly this trap. Stan did not become happy by seeing through the world. He became miserable. His ability to find everything fake and pointless, to look at music and movies and ice cream, and even his best friend and see only filth, was not presented as clear sight or hard-won wisdom. It was presented as a sickness, a heavy gray sadness that hollowed him out and drove away everyone who loved him. The show, which spent decades teaching its viewers to doubt the soft and comforting, used its single most heartfelt episode to show that pure doubt, taken all the way, becomes its own kind of illness. The man who finds everything fake is the saddest man in the room, and the show knew it, and it said so plainly the one time it stopped joking. There is a second character who matters just as much here, and he points to the way out of the trap. Across the whole run, Kyle keeps doing the thing the show seems to think a person should actually aim for. He sees through the comfortable lies as clearly as anyone, refusing to clap along when the town demands a forced opinion, asking the blunt question that pops the hollow campaign, standing nearly alone against the crowd when the crowd is being foolish. And yet Kyle still cares. He still gets angry about real wrongs, still believes things matter, still feels and argues and tries. He is proof, built right into the show, that doubting the easy comfort does not have to mean killing off the heart. Kyle holds the doubt and the caring together, which is exactly the balance Stan loses. A generation copying Kyle would have gotten the best of the show. A generation copying Stan at his lowest, or copying the crowd that just goes along, would have gotten the worst. This is the tension sitting at the very center of everything the show believes, and it is a tension the show actually holds rather than resolves. It wants people to be tough enough to hear hard truths and honest enough to face their real problems. It also knows, because it showed it, that toughness pushed too far curdles into the joyless, friendless gray of a boy who can no longer enjoy anything at all. The wisdom in the show, on its best days, lives in holding both of those at once, in being skeptical of false comfort while still leaving room to feel, to care, to take real pain seriously, to accept genuine help when it is genuine. The failure, the thing the show seems to fear, is choosing one side and living there. A person who believes every comforting message is a sucker. A person who doubts every comforting message is Stan at the end of his birthday, alone in a new house, watching the world turn to waste. Neither one is where the show wants anyone to end up. Whether the show got it right in the end has to be answered with the same honesty the whole argument has tried to keep. The fair verdict is that it was right about a great deal and that it carried its own risk. It saw a real overreach coming, the way a culture can drift into treating people as fragile, into selling comfort instead of help, into mistaking labels for cure cures and protection for kindness. And it named that drift early and often, sometimes years before the mainstream caught up. On that score, it looks less like a cynic and more like an early warning, a show that kept pointing at a quiet problem while most of the world was still calling that problem progress. But it also spent decades teaching a generation to sneer, and a sneer is a dangerous thing to hand a child, because it is so easy to mistake for understanding. The same show that warned against becoming Stan may have helped raise a few too many Stans. Kids so practiced at doubting that they forgot how to believe in anything, including their own worth. Both of these are true at the same time, and pretending only one is true would be its own kind of comforting lie. This is what the whole long argument finally points at, and it reaches well past the cartoon. The lesson buried in all those episodes was never that feelings are fake, or that cruelty is good, or that everyone hurting should just toughen up and shut up. The lesson, stated as plainly as the show ever allowed itself to state anything, was that comfort is not the same as help, and that a label is not the same as a cure, and that being protected from every hard truth does not make a person strong. A generation that took that lesson to heart and also remembered the warning about the boy who saw only garbage, and also noticed that Kyle managed to doubt and still care, would be in fine shape. A generation that grabbed only the doubt and dropped the rest would be armored and lonely. The show offered all of it. What each viewer did with the pieces is a different story, and not one a cartoon can control. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So the heart is there, the belief is there, the warning about its own danger is even there. All of it woven through nearly 30 years of the rudest show on television. What remains is to pull the entire thing into one place and ask what it finally amounts to, when the jokes are set aside and the argument is laid out whole. After all the labels and the walls and the campaigns and the comforting songs, after the cruelty and the rare tenderness and the deep distrust of easy answers, the question is simply what South Park has been trying to say about pain and comfort and getting through life, and whether in the end it earned the right to say it. Section 10. What it all adds up to. The jokes can be set aside now. The shock and the crudeness and the noise and the thing underneath can be laid out plainly, because underneath all of it there has only ever been one argument. South Park told that argument in 100 different disguises across nearly 30 years, dressing it up as a drunk dad, a sad 10-year-old, a hoarding counselor, a scheming boy in a cardboard box, a violent principal, a fake anti-bully crusader, and a singer prescribed like medicine. The disguises changed with the times. The argument never did. Pulled out of all its costumes and stood in plain light, the case the show has been making is simple enough to state in a single breath, and stubborn enough to have survived 3 decades of a changing world. It started with a seed planted in a story about a bottle. When Randy decided his drinking was a disease he was powerless over, the show watched a label meant to comfort him turn into a cage that held him down. The lesson sitting in that early episode was small and sharp. The story a person believes about their own struggle changes how big that struggle becomes, and a story of helplessness tends to produce helplessness. That was the first link in the chain. The idea that a comforting name can do real harm, and everything the show built afterward grew out of it. The next link took the same idea and turned it darker. When a doctor handed a grieving, hollowed-out 10-year-old a tidy name for his sadness, the name did not comfort and did not cage. It simply did nothing at all. Stan walked out of that office carrying the exact weight he walked in with, plus a useless word for it, and the show refused to pretend the word had helped. What made that episode more than a complaint was the care underneath it. The show took the boy's pain seriously precisely by denying him a fake cure, which proved that the target was never the pain itself. The target was the false promise that naming a thing is the same as healing it. From there, the show went after the whole machine that those labels live inside. The story of the hoarding boy and the buried childhood hurt mocked the deep and fashionable belief that every problem hides a secret cause that only experts and an elaborate process can dig up. A man died inside that process, and a child fixed himself by ignoring it completely and simply throwing out his trash. The plain, unglamorous act beat the grand journey, and the show planted a question it would keep asking for years afterward. The question of whether all the digging is sometimes just a way of staying stuck, while the obvious solution waits in plain sight. Then the show turned the camera around and showed what happens once a culture treats these labels as powerful and excusing. Cartman, the great schemer, picked up a false diagnosis the way he picks up every weapon, and used it to dodge responsibility, to silence anyone who objected, and to get exactly what he wanted while pretending to suffer. The boy who claimed the most pain won, even though his pain was a lie, because the world around him had agreed never to question a claim of suffering. That is the moment the argument grew teeth. A comforting idea that does nothing is one kind of problem. A comforting idea that hands the worst people in the room a weapon is a far bigger one. The same instinct scaled up from one boy to a whole town produced The Walls. A muscular principal began running a school like a fortress against offense, raging at tiny words while shrugging at real harm, and a community started building protected places to keep every harsh truth locked outside. The people doing the protecting turned out to be the aggressors. The gentle cause turned out to be a license for cruelty, and the one who suffered most was the kind boy forced to absorb all the ugliness so others could stay comfortable. At the end of that road sat the darkest image the show ever drew on the subject, an entire community putting reality itself to death so that no feeling would ever have to be hurt again. The warning was unmistakable. A society organized around protecting feelings above truth does not become kinder. It becomes fragile, dishonest, and finally at war with the real world. The kindness industry got the same treatment, the booming business of campaigns and counselors and inspiring speakers. The fake anti-bully crusader bullied everyone in reach while waving the banner of his cause. The slick awareness video turned out to be about money and attention, rather than the kid being hurt. And the actual victim, a small boy being abused at home where no campaign could see, saved himself through a quiet act of private courage. The cure that worked looked nothing like the loud machine built to provide it, which was the whole point. A campaign is not the same as caring, and the people most eager to be seen fighting cruelty sometimes turn out to be the cruelest of all. And then came the gentlest disguise, the one that feels purely good to hear. Across two stories told 12 years apart, the show watched the warm message of total self-acceptance shade into a way of lowering standards, removing healthy shame, and keeping people exactly where they are. A man dove to the bottom of the ocean to raise a bar the whole culture kept lowering, and when he raised it, dignity returned. A doctor prescribed a body positivity singer to a poor boy because the real medicine cost too much, and cereal companies took up the gospel of loving your body to keep selling sugar. The softest message of all turned out to serve the people selling it more than the people hearing it, and a flattering lie, the show suggested, can function like a cage even when it sounds like love. Laid end to end, the chain reveals what it has been building toward. Each story is the same instinct wearing a new and usually larger or softer form. The urge to sue the person rather than tell them the truth. The reach for comfort over honesty. It runs from one man's bottle to a whole society's walls to the kindest song ever sung, growing gentler and more seductive as it goes. Until by the end, the comfort is so warm and so flattering that arguing against it feels like arguing against kindness itself. That escalation is the spine of everything. The show kept following the comforting instinct into bigger and softer rooms and kept finding the same rot at the back of each one. So the complete picture, stated once and meant to carry the weight of everything that led to it, comes down to a few plain claims that the show never stopped making. Comfort is not the same as help. A label is not the same as a cure. Being shielded from every hard truth does not make a person strong, it makes them weak. Real care means telling someone the truth, trusting that they are strong enough to bear it, and helping them take honest action on their actual problem, rather than soothing them, naming them, walling them off, or flattering them into staying the same. And the true villains in story after story are never the people who are genuinely hurting. They are the systems that profit, the manipulators who exploit, the hypocrites who perform, and the dishonesty that grows up around pain like weeds around a wound. There is one more claim, and it is the one that keeps the whole worldview from tipping over into simple meanness, because the show built it in on purpose. Toughness pushed too far becomes its own sickness. Doubt that swallows everything turns a person into the gray, joyless boy who could no longer enjoy a bowl of ice cream or the face of his best friend. The show knew this, and it said so in its most serious hour, which means its message was never simply to harden up and sneer at the soft. The wisdom it points toward, on its best days, lives in holding two things at once, in doubting false comfort while still leaving room to feel, to care, to take real pain seriously, and to accept genuine help when it is genuine. The failure it fears is picking one side and living there forever, becoming either the sucker who believes every comforting lie, or the cynic who can no longer believe in anything at all. Whether the show earned the right to make all of this, after decades of cruelty and shock and the occasional cheap shot, has to be weighed honestly. And the honest answer leans toward yes, with conditions. The first thing in its favor is consistency. This was not a fad the show picked up to seem clever for a season. It held the same view for close to 30 years, through changing trends and changing politics, which is the mark of a real belief rather than a passing pose. The second thing is timing. The show kept aiming at whatever whatever was rising, and it was often early, naming the tension in an idea years before the wider world started to feel it, which makes it look less like a bitter old crank and more like an early watchman calling out something real on the horizon. The third thing in its favor is the hardest one for a cruel show to fake, and the show did not fake it. It showed real tenderness for real pain when it counted, playing a child's depression completely straight with no joke to undercut it, putting its sympathy with the gentle boy crushed by others' cruelty rather than the comfortable people hiding behind their walls, and aiming genuine anger at a system that puts honest help out of reach of the poor. A show that simply hated the suffering would never have bothered with any of that. And the fourth thing is that the core claim is, by the test of ordinary life, basically true. Most people, looking honestly at their own lives, can recall a moment when comfort was offered where help was needed, when a kind word stood in for a hard truth that someone should have told them. The show is pointing at something people already half know. The conditions on that verdict are real too, and skipping them would be its own dishonesty. The show is a blunt and savage instrument, and a tool that crude does not always land where it aims. It has overshot, splashing jokes meant for systems and hypocrites onto real people who did not deserve them. And the people who find it genuinely hurtful in those moments are not all simply missing the point. More seriously, a show that spent 30 years teaching a generation to doubt the soft and the comforting may have helped produce a few too many of the very cynics it warned against. Kids so practiced at sneering that they forgot how to believe in anything, including their own worth. So the right it earned is a real right, but a qualified one. It earned the right to say the true and useful thing at the center of all its noise, with the honest caveat that it sometimes said that thing carelessly, and that the lesson was easy to take in the wrong half. What makes the argument land even on people who never shared the show's politics or its taste for shock is that the central observation does not depend on either. A person can find the show vulgar and still recognize the truth that comfort and help are not the same. A person can disagree with the show about nearly everything else and still know from their own experience that a label is not a cure, and that being protected from every hard thing leaves a person unready for the world. The show wrapped a genuinely useful idea in a package designed to offend as many people as possible, which means the package and the idea can be judged separately. The package is what it is. The idea has outlasted 3 decades and a transformed culture, which is more than most ideas dressed in better clothes can claim. Set against everything the show has been accused of, this is what it actually adds up to. Not a hatred of feelings, not a love of cruelty, not a demand that the hurting toughen up and be quiet. The argument, held steady across a quarter century and more, is that a culture can love people badly by soothing them when it should be honest with them, that the comforts it keeps reaching for can quietly keep people weak and stuck and fooled, and that real care is the harder, plainer thing of telling the truth and trusting people to rise to it. The show made that case in the rudest voice available, which is part of why so many people never heard the case at all, only the rudeness. But the case was always there, built link by link, story by story, hidden in plain sight the whole time. All of that is the argument, weighed and judged and laid out whole. What remains is smaller and quieter and, in the end, more important than any verdict on a television show. Underneath the case about comfort and labels and walls, underneath the cleverness and the cruelty and the decades of noise, there is a plain human truth that has nothing to do with cartoons and does not care whether anyone finds the show funny. It is the kind of truth a person carries out of all of this and keeps long after the jokes have faded. The thing that actually matters when the screen goes dark and real life, with its real pain and its real choices, is waiting. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.